Hello guys, welcome back to yet another video of Genre Paints. And today we'll be painting the hood on this Git in the iconic blue that you've seen on the other members of my warband. I've switched it up a little bit with the placing of my camera and the lighting and the level of zoom. So if this is better or worse, please let me know and we'll keep improving until we find the perfect way of filming these videos. But for now, let's dive straight in, paint some minis together. So on my palette, right now I have only one color. So for this step, I'm gonna use Zarbag green. And Zarbag green is a layer paint, but it's much more blue than it is actually green. At least everyone that sees the hoods or has seen them still labels them as blue hoods. But the paint is called Zarbag green. And so with that, we're gonna approach it in much the same way as we've done many other things in all the other videos. First, we start with the base, so the color that we would like it to be in the end, and work up from there. So in this part right now, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try and see which parts will catch more light and mark those out. And since this is not the final highlight, you can go from about, what I'm looking for is to mark the model from about the halfway point towards the highlight. So where I want the shade to be, I'll leave black, and parts that I will paint either in the mid-tone or one of the highlight colors up till the final highlight, I will sketch in with Zarbag green. Zarbag green is the paint, yes. In the background, maybe very faintly, you'll hear some background noises. That is because they're doing construction a little further down the road. I can't really do anything about that, guys. I'm sorry. And in this phase, just take your time, have a good look at the model, at the hood, and where you want those highlights to be. Of course, here we're painting a blue hood, but even if you would be painting with any other colors or a color of your choice, the process will remain much the same. It's a little bit too thin, so the coverage is not great anymore. You still want to thin down your paints, but it doesn't have to be so thin down as you would when starting to blend colors together. Okay. Sometimes I wonder, or people ask me, so why do you spend so much time at the sketching phase or at this phase painting in these colors? Because really for me, this is the hard work. Of course, in different stages, you have to blend things together and make sure that it all looks nice in the finished product. But this is the foundation of your miniature. At least when I paint, this is the foundation for me, for the miniatures I paint. Here I decide, I have to think and look where my highlights will be, where my shadows will come. Again, I say this and I try to get you all a little bit more enthusiastic about painting the base layer, because I know that sometimes people aren't so enthusiastic about that, and they much rather highlight or work things up, blend things together, so spend their time with a little bit more different or other techniques than simply applying this layer of paint. And I get that. I also hated it for a very, very long time until I started utilizing it in a very different way. And ever since I started doing that, I'm also realizing the importance of this first step better and better. So of course here you can be a bit rough, I want to say, or a bit more hastily, because of course here the top half of the hood will either be Zarbag green or a highlight. At least the part before it curves up. And I'll take the top of the ear somewhere here as more or less the halfway point. So from there, I might go into the shadows. We'll see in a second when this layer dries. Doesn't have great coverage, so we'll go over that again as well. I might go a bit lower. As I said, for me it's easier to blend darker colors together than it is lighter. So even though I'm gonna blend, I'm going a bit low with the Sote green at this part, blending this together with a shadow color will be fairly easy. Here, this line, I still want that color. Here already, I'll start to keep in mind that I will want to move towards darker blues. You could get away with painting most of the top Sote green, and even if you end up doing it, I recommend you still think about it a little bit, because it can help you even in these first stages. So to know that here in this area, that it will be darker because it curves upwards. The top, of course, will be Sote green. And here at the back, this will also catch a lot of light. So once you get the hang of it, once you get a little bit better of an idea of what we're doing here or why we're doing it, this process, you can speed it up. So also for the purpose of these videos, right now I'll try to speed it up a little bit just to make sure that they remain within an acceptable time length. Here I'm gonna join them together so they will look coherent at this side. All right, let's look at this part here at the front. We missed something here. This is a more this is a less accessible part of the model. So if you also don't see it so well on the screen, because I'm holding my miniature at weird angles, please forgive me. You see, I'm actually basically just, without exactly knowing where I'm putting it, making sure it's in there. Why do I decide to go so deep with the Sote green here? Because at the side of the hood, I know it's going to be very, very dark. So there, I want to create some contrast between the shadow in there and the Sote green on that side. Okay. There we go. That being said, the front, we already have a little bit of an idea of where we want the hood colors, or at least the mid-tone to be. And by having the mid-tone defined, painted on, we also know where our highlights will move towards, but also our shadows. Just gonna reapply it here at some stages. Oh, I went over some of the skin there. That is messy of me. It really shouldn't happen, because now I need to go back and correct that. Since we already highlighted and glazed over it, that's actually going to be a costly mistake, in the sense that it will take me some time to correct that. But might also not be so costly, since it's just a very small dot and is not directly in the focal point area. Okay, and with that, we can move to the back of the robe. And we do more or less the same, I guess exactly the same. Here at the bottom, I want some of the Sote green in. I notice on my brush tip, some paint is either dried there or it's getting a little bit cluttered, so I'll just wash it off. Okay. And with that here, you want to pick out, or try to pick out, the spots that you will know catch more light first. Because when you have that done, you can still see if you want it to be brighter or darker. Adding paint to it is always an option. And if you've watched other videos when talking about highlighting or deep shadows or extreme highlights such as white, or extreme shadows such as pure black, you want to try and be economical with them. Of course, if you look at it like this, we're going to need a little bit more color. This will be Sotek as well. And here towards the bottom. So we'll have a little line over the back of the robe where it'll be a little bit darker before it moves to more lighter blue again at the bottom. And there we go. It's still messy, and I'll probably go over it a little bit more just to improve on the coverage of the Sotek green. But for now, for this part, I'm already pretty satisfied. So we have done a lot of the work that will save us a lot of time and energy later on when working on this robe. And we've done it in just about 10 minutes. Okay. So guys, I'm just gonna work around, add a little bit more of the Sotek green to it to improve the coverage that we have right now. And then we'll start moving towards shading this model and highlighting it. So I'll see you in the next video, guys, and stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to this second part of painting the blue hood on this Git. And this is almost a direct continuation. The only thing I did in between is reapply some of the Sotek green to the most prominent areas to increase the coverage a little bit. And I've loaded up a new color on my palette, which is roughly a 1-1 mix between Sotek green and Stegadon scale green. And we're gonna use that color as our first color for the shadows. So let's dive straight in and continue painting this Gitz hood. Okay. So what we're gonna do now is simply see where we want the shadows to be better pronounced or more pronounced. And what you'll see me doing here is I will drag it from the paint from the mid-tone towards the shadows. Still leaving the black showing through there where I would absolutely want the deepest shadows. And when we get to those spots, we'll of course go to pure Stegadon scale green or some other color or shadow color if you'd like. I've decided to, in this miniature, mix the Sotek green down towards Stegadon scale green and darken it further when glazing. But you could also use a Baden black for it if you want less of the green blue in it. You could also shade it, glaze it in at some point. There we go. And here, if you just go over it and you go over some of the Stegadon scale green, that is fine. You could start to create some preliminary blends, even though that is not per se what we will be doing at this stage. There we go. Here, it'll probably be darker still, and that is fine. But since I'm coloring this in a little bit, or painting this in with the Stegadon scale green a little bit, with the mix we have now, if we get to the point where we use pure Stegadon scale green, that will help in the transition. And if that is already been made a little bit easier, that will again in turn help when we get to the glazing part. All right. And you just work your way around the model like this. Just applying some paint there where you want it. You see here, this part, even though it's you could be considered a very deep shadow, I want it a little dark at the bottom and the more deepest recess shadow in there. Again, just take your time, go around the model and see where you want to make the first marks of the shadows. And again, this gives you quite a lot of control over where you will have the shadows and the highlights at some point. And this is one of the main reasons why sometimes it can be preferable to paint in shadows rather than do an all-over shade with the Games Workshop shade range, because it gives you less of that control. And it's easier because you still have all the colors that you see, we have them on our palette. So even if you go over too much of the base color, we have this mix of Stegadon Saute green on our palette, which is not always the case if you use a shade. I already think this is enough. Let's go to the back side and start applying some more of that mix we have right now. And you'll see on the video, almost everywhere I'm gonna go slightly over the Saute green. Again, it is fairly translucent, or still a little bit translucent, so it will have a little bit of a different finish over the Abaddon black than over the Saute green, creating a very small but eventually already helpful transition. This is of course still far from finished, don't worry. Okay, this part, we don't need it too dark. We could always darken it later. So even if at some point you're not sure how light or dark you want to go, you can always go back at some point. It's not set in stone. So if later on you decide you want this to be lighter or darker, just go back, you know which colors we've used, and change it. Okay. You'll notice that the coverage might still not always be perfect. That is fine. You can just go over it a couple of times over the course of painting in these shadow colors. It's still pretty, I thought it would be darker. It looks a little bit darker on my palette than it does on the model. So the effect is fairly minimal. I thought it would have a stronger effect. I'm just gonna stick with it and finish it since it's what I'm using now, and there is a difference. So I can either go over larger parts with pure Stegadon scale green, or I could be more selective in my highlights. There's many ways to work around that as well. Or you could just add more of the Stegadon scale green to this mix and go over the same areas. But that would increase the length of the video, and that's not what we want. We'll just see how we will work around that. There we go. You see, once you've applied the base color and you're just blocking in where you want what colors, it is actually a fairly quick process and you can go over. Why this is also nice to do, because it's very forgiving since we're still sketching. As I said, if you notice that you go over too much of the base, you can just bring it back. If you notice you miss parts where you want more of the base color, some more of the Saute green, it's very low key. You can just go back and forth and keep adjusting it until you're satisfied with the positioning or the placement of all the initial colors. But for now, and especially for this video, I think this is good enough for me when it comes to the in-between mix. So stay tuned and we'll immediately continue applying the Stegadon Scale Green in the deepest shadows. All right, welcome back. And right now, we'll directly continue where we left off and start by painting with Stegadon Scale Green. Stegadon Scale Green, I use it because I've used it on the blue robe since the beginning. Be warned, it's actually not a optimal paint to do this because Stegadon Scale Green is a base paint. So the coverage is generally better than all the other paints that we've used. And since we didn't start with it, if we are not very careful, or how do I phrase this? It is less forgiving at this stage. If we go over some of the earlier painted colors, there's a higher chance that it will immediately have a very strong feel or look of that Stegadon Scale Green. Of course, it could all be repaired, so don't worry too much about it, but keep it in mind if you're following this tutorial and if you're using the same paints, that when it comes to it, you want to be a little bit more careful when applying the Stegadon Scale Green, since it can show an effect over the other colors much faster than you might have been used to so far. I don't know what would have been a good alternative. I have the impression that most of the dark colors that GW produces are base paints. There probably is a good alternative to this, I just don't know it. And you'll see, even though I just mentioned, I'm not so careful. I try to be neat, of course, but still for me, this is about blocking in where I want the highlights and the shadows. And in these deepest recesses, I paint them in. And this is again usually, if you want to skip this stage, I guess you could apply Sote green and then wash it as well. Of course, it will not look exactly the same. It will have different tones and skin tones. But if you find it difficult to determine where you want your shadows, especially, then a wash can help. Because washes, the paint will settle in the recesses, so in the shadows, generally speaking. So it can help you determine what parts of your model are sculpted in such a way that they will constitute as shadows or not. And even from that point, you could still use this technique or follow this tutorial, because you could simply apply Sote green, wash over it with something, say, like I guess a blue or a blue-greenish wash, have these shadows defined for you, and then work your way back up to Sote green with the assistance of the shadows already being defined for you. Of course, it's a little bit more work, I believe, and it is an extra step that you would need to take. But if you are not confident enough yet to make all these decisions, then I guess it could be an option. And as you can see, this time we started on a back. Actually, already it's starting to show, the hood is starting to get some character already, even though we didn't focus on blending it together nicely at all. And still, I think we've achieved this at a pretty fast pace, a pretty high pace rate. So, and that is because, especially at the first phase, we have defined where we want these shadows to be, or at least, I guess technically we've defined where we do not want them to be. You can go as light and as dark as you want. I decided to go from Sotek to Stegadon Scale Green, knowing that I'll probably shade in some Abaddon black or purple once, or glaze in once we get to that stage. But if you want to go darker than Stegadon Scale Green, you could just do that. At the end, it is your mini, and you want your mini to look cool. Okay. And with that, I see in the hood here on top, we need to add some paint here at the bottom. And you see I'm still quite haphazardly applying the paint, just to make sure that there's a hint of that Stegadon Scale Green in there and that it covers most of the Abaddon Black. And here I want that as well. You see I made a little bit of mistake over the final edge, but that is fine because we will do the same process for the highlights as well. I have found painting cloth fairly difficult, and before using the more traditional method that I mentioned, where you shade and then start highlighting, especially because sometimes you have some of these larger, flatter areas like that, or here at the back, whereas I found it fairly difficult to get a very nice looking effect when starting with your darkest color, then washing over it and working my way up from that. And I actually found this method, even though it is a little bit more time consuming probably, to yield me much better results, or results that I was much more satisfied with. And with that, guys, actually we've applied the base coat of Sote Green, a first shadow color of a 1-1 mix between Sote Green and Stegadon Scale Green, and our deepest shadow color of Stegadon Scale Green. So for now, stay tuned and we'll move on to the next color, where we will be highlighting.